In Kinsey's view, a lot of sex crime was really not crime at all. He seemed to worship sexual experience. I mean, he had a 24/7 obsession with sex long before he attained the position at Indiana University. So for him, all forms of sexual experience, to one degree or another, could have merit that were outside the pale of traditional morality.
Many researchers have come to believe that it was this philosophy that allowed Kinsey and his team to communicate with active child molesters and even train them to record their abuse in a scientific manner. While the Kinsey Institute continues to deny this, further evidence is found from the testimony of Dr. Clarence Tripp on the Phil Donahue Show. Listen carefully as Tripp confirms that there were multiple pedophiles, not just one, and says that they were trained observers that used stopwatches.
I'm going to say that once more, and if I'm wrong, let them sue me. He said oral and manual techniques were used on those children.
Yeah,
what American is going to defend that?
How does C.A. Tripp respond to that?
She's talking about data that came from pedophiles, that he would listen to only pedophiles who were very careful, used stopwatches, knew how to record their things, did careful surveys. And these she resents very much, but they're very important.
So he interviewed people who were known criminals, I assume. Were they in prison at the time?
Oh, certainly not. But they were, in her sense, criminals because they were pedophiles. But they were trained
Oh, in her sense,
observers.
They were criminals because they were pedophiles. They're raping children and they're not criminals. You're going to defend
Nobody
that.
was raping children. What they were doing...
What do you call sexually, manually, and orally abusing a baby, and you're a bloody pedophile?
We also have an interview that was a phone interview that I have a copy of. It's in my book, between Gebhardt and Dr. Muir, who was my editor, in which Gebhardt admits that they told the pedophiles to use stopwatches.
The interview Dr. Reisman refers to took place on November 2nd, 1992, between Dr. Gordon Muir and Paul Gebhardt. Dr. Muir also appeared on The Donahue Show as the editor of the book, Kinsey, Sex and Fraud. On the show, he confronted Clarence Tripp.
And you're telling me that Kinsey came across in an interview sample of 5,300 people, he found pedophiles who had stopwatches, just happened to have stopwatches, just happened to have all that data handy?
Some 2 years later, in a phone interview, Dr. Muir would pursue a similar line of questioning with Paul Gebhardt, one of the original co-authors of the Kinsey Reports, who succeeded Alfred Kinsey as the original director of the Kinsey Institute. Listen carefully how Gebhardt admits that there were multiple pedophiles that he and Kinsey worked with, how they actually encouraged some of the adults to molest children, and that it was at the instruction of Kinsey and his team that they used stopwatches.
Table 32. Yeah, the table's all right, but these all were done with stopwatches necessarily. It says below table 32, the legend says duration of stimulation before climax. Observations timed with second hand or stopwatch. So second hand or stopwatch. Okay, well that's, you refreshed my memory. I had no idea that it was used on that many. Well, my question to you is this. Who did that? Who did the timing? It was dependent on who it was. Most of it was done by one individual, a man with some scientific training, but not a known scientist. The other cases were done by parents at our suggestion, and at the in the book, some of them were followed up for several years to make sure that true orgasm was involved. That looks like prospective planning there.
Yeah, but not on our part.
You mean pedophiles just took it upon themselves to do follow-up experiments to find out if true orgasms were involved?
No. We had some... Try this again.
At this stage of the interview, Gebhardt engages in a bit of wordplay, but listen carefully as Dr. Muir gets to the point with him.
Once we ask people about giving us their observations, we would ask them later, too. In other words, if there were some pedophiles who reported their data to us, and if they got in contact with us later, we would then ask them more about it. We follow up on like re-interviewing people occasionally. We call them retakes. I think that's mentioned.
Right, it is. But I mean, what I'm trying to get at was, this sounds like it was a little bit of prospective planning here.
No. We did not plan and organize any Masters and Johnson-type experiments with children, period. Never did.
So, do pedophiles normally go around with stopwatches?
They do if we tell them that we're interested in it. But this isn't a plan on our part. They do if we tell them that we're interested in it.
Know who these children are, how their parents were involved, and have we talked to those children now as adults?
When I wrote to the Kinsey Institute and I asked, what about these children? They just casually wrote me back. Gebhardt casually wrote me back that, well, we never had any follow-up on these children. It was too expensive, he said, or just impossible. What does he mean there's never been a follow-up? You just talked about men who are raping children, at least 317 children. Now we're looking at, it comes up to maybe 2,035 at minimum, probably. The youngest 2 months of age, and you call yourselves, quote-unquote, scientists, and you've never even followed up. That's a lie. There's got to be some information, and if it was good information, if they had found out that these children were completely unharmed, lived fine lives, we would know about it. They would have passed that information on to us so fast.
Many of the children abused by Kinsey's pedophiles probably had no idea that they were part of a government-sponsored study. Most likely living out their lives in suffering and confusion about what had happened to them.